Welcome, everybody, to the ECDev Network and our Clubhouse call. I'm going to hand it over to you, Bob, and let's get started.
Thank you, Dan. Welcome, everybody. So glad to have you here. Those of us in Canada that see a little bit of gloom, it's nice to be able to have some conversation to brighten up your day. And today's conversation, I think, is pretty brightening on the horizon, which is the idea of small business capital. Now, if this is the first time in the room, excuse me, welcome. I'm just going to set the room or reset the room to let you know what's happening today. My name is Bob Minhas. I'm one of the co-hosts here with Dan Taylor and Laura Fritz, and I help economic development communities build knowledge-based learning systems. And today, again, talking about small business capital, I'm hoping to hear from different economic development professionals, or again, even fundees or small business owners, about how are we injecting capital during and post-COVID to really help our small business economies thrive. So just a couple of things to be aware of in the room. The session is being recorded. We do love repurposing it for a podcast in the future. And if you haven't yet, the speakers that you see on stage are amazing at what they do. So be sure to follow each speaker you see on stage. They'll probably be in other clubhouse rooms in the future where they can continue other conversations that you might want to be a part of as well. If you find the topic super interesting, please feel free to ping friends or colleagues that might want to participate or just learn from the discussion. When you're interested in joining us on stage, whether it's to provide some insight or just to ask a question, there's a hand over a notepad icon on the bottom. When you hit that, it'll raise your hand, and myself, Dan, or Lara can add you to the stage. Now, keep in mind, if we do that, your mic goes live. So as soon as you jump on the stage, you definitely want to hit mute as soon as you can. For those of us on stage, just a reminder, if you ever want to acknowledge someone that said something really great, if you hit your mute button on and off super quick, that represents clapping. And then, of course, if you want to ping or invite some folks to the room as well, for those of us on stage, that's great. And when you are participating or giving some knowledge, feel free to let us know you're done speaking. So at the end of your share, just simply say, hey, I'm Bob and I'm done speaking. And that allows the next person who wants to join in room to be able to jump right there. Did I miss anything, Dan? I think we've gotten everything so far. Is that fair to say? Yes, clapping. Awesome. That's great. So, first question I want to throw out there, and Lara kind of hinted to it earlier, is I'd love to hear from different community leaders on whether it's themselves or another community. What are some funding models or funding injections you've seen starting to have traction or perhaps working for small business owners in your community? Dan, can I throw the first one to you? Because I know that Innisfil is active in constantly feeding its community.
Yeah, so in Ontario and in Canada, one of the best resources is our CFDCs, which stands for Community Futures Development Corporation. I know, Bob, you're very familiar with those. And they're what I would refer to as a higher risk tolerance loan organization backed by the federal government. And and it's board run, and the entire objective is to bridge the gap between traditional banking or other investor capital that might be available, where new businesses or perhaps businesses undergoing some change do in fact have access to capital. So why don't we start there and see if people are familiar with similar organizations or if they have questions on how these things work.
Yes, thank you, Dan. And I think just for clarification, community organizations are amazing lenders. They actually purposefully exist in communities not to compete with a bank. So what'll happen is when you are having trouble getting funded by a traditional bank, that's where a CFTC will actually come in. So they're really, really great at funding startups or even funding growth in a community. Their ultimate objective, just like economic development professionals elsewhere, is how are they creating jobs in the community? So if you're in a community that's defined as rural, at the very least, sign up on their list, learn what they have to offer. And they are federally funded, so obviously with everything happening, they're really eager to support businesses. But I'm curious to know, maybe Laura, can I throw this to you in the U.S.? Are there similar agencies that operate similar to a CFTC, funding high risk entrepreneurs in perhaps rural communities, anything like that?
Yes, so ours are called Community Development Finance Institutions and or CDFIs. There are CDFIs throughout the US, and they essentially invest federal dollars alongside of private capital to serve the business community. The CDFI is also responsible for managing our new market tax credits program. New market tax credits are a funding mechanism that provides equity into development, specifically in underserved and um, areas where there's large unemployment in order to help facilitate development. And it's a complex problem that I could go on for an hour about, but CDFIs also manage that program. So they look at it from a lending, but also as an equity investor into development. And I'm Laura Fritz, and I'm done speaking.
Amazing. So there are agencies like that out there as in the US as well. I'm curious, I'd love to hear perhaps from Brandon or Jimmy in your communities. Are you seeing the need or the ability to inject capital into small business communities? Jimmy, did you want to go first? Is it something you've seen in Texas or in the Texan area that's been similar?
Sure, I will jump on here for just a little bit. Um, we have the opportunity zone situation, and we haven't utilized it in our community yet. But that's a whole. I'm kind of like Laura. You could go on for days about that. Not really a great tool for small businesses. We're in Texas, so we have the sales tax funding, and I work mostly with small businesses, and we try to leverage our funds with banks and maybe come in with part of the down payment or kind of tie our funding to maybe a small piece of equipment or just job creation and things like that. We're small, so we usually can't give small businesses everything that they need, but we can, like I said, leverage our funds, and we work with the banks and we try to kind of just see what they need. We don't have a real rubber stamped thing for everybody. We have an application process, obviously, but we it's kind of unique for each person. We look at each business plan and we kind of see what they need, and we try to meet their needs and fill the gaps wherever the best way that we can. So that's the most utilized tool that we use in our community. And I'm Jimmy, and I'm done talking.
Jimmy.
Thanks. I love the idea of using part of that sales tax capital. That's interesting. Dan, did you want to add to the conversation?
Yeah, Jimmy, I just wanted to get a bit more clarification. Could you just uh, maybe just help explain? So, is it your economic development entity that leverages the sales tax, or could you just explain the construct a little bit more? That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
So we get 25% of the city's sales tax. So the city collects 2%, and we get 0.25% of that. So we divide that up. So, like, for instance, I have a business plan sitting on my desk right now, and he needs about $40,000. So we're not going to give him the full 40,000, but if he goes to the bank and borrows that money, he's going to have maybe a 20% down payment. So we may come in and just give him the 20%. And it usually ends up being a grant, but we don't set it up as a grant. We set it up like a forgivable loan, and he has to meet some certain requirements. And usually our requirements are he hires, if he says in his business plan he's going to hire an employee, so he's got to get that employee hired. He has to purchase the equipment he said he was going to purchase. He has to stay in business for so many years. And each year we forgive, like if it's a 3-year forgivable loan, we forgive a portion of that each year. And because we're small, we manage that in-house, but a lot of economic developers don't do that. They farm that out, or they have a financial, maybe a CFO at the city who handles that, but we handle all of ours in-house. And those decisions are made by our board of directors. So yeah, we have a lot of people approach us for different things. And with our sales tax, we're supposed to follow some certain guidelines. We have guidelines developed by the state of Texas that we're supposed to follow. Because we are small, we sort of operate in the gray area sometimes because these are small businesses. They're not large manufacturers. So we kind of have to juggle that, but that's not what you want to really know about. So I'm Jimmy.
That's super interesting because I know that, and Dan, I don't know if you know about this. I know that in certain Canadian high tourism hotspots, there's a tourism tax, and I'm wondering if that, I'm not sure if that goes back into a similar fund for us here in Ontario, but
Yeah, it's a little different. So
little,
I'm laughing a little bit and a little bit tongue in cheek. So us Canadians, see ourselves as very social in how we handle business and capital, and I love the program you explained, Jimmy. And to me, that almost seems more Canadian than American because we don't have something like that I'm aware of. So I just love perceptions. Back to you, what you were saying, Bob, is so there's a DMF fund. It's called a Destination Marketing Fund. And what it is, it's a surcharge on hotel rooms in particular and other things. And that goes into a pot of money that is usually managed by a destination marketing organization that has a board, and then that destination marketing organization would decide how to spend the funds. Typically, I believe it's primarily done for marketing and promotion versus loans and expansion. Thanks for asking. I'm Dan, and I'm done speaking.
really great distinction. Thank you. Brandon, I'd be curious to hear in your community if there have been any types of attempts or capital injections to help small businesses as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Dan and Bob, and to Lara and Jimmy for their insights. Capital is always tough. We're a government agency, so we're not always able to, provide that direct line of funding support, and it sometimes becomes frustrating. But we've been able to implement some really cool programs that local businesses have been able to leverage, and I'll highlight a few of them. The first being the Downtowns of Durham project. So if you go on the web, downtownsofdurham.ca, Durham region, we are part of the Greater Toronto Area. We're on the northern and eastern edge of the GTA. Population just over, I think, 700,000 right now, but over the next 30 years, we're projecting to grow to 1.1 million. So there's a lot of housing development. There's a lot of new people that are coming to the communities. Durham region is made up of 8 municipalities or 8 cities or towns, and within them we have smaller towns, villages, hamlets, and so we actually have 14 downtowns that we've designated that are in Durham region. So as part of our early response to COVID, we created the Downtowns of Durham platform, which allowed businesses to update on this platform what types of services they were available, whether it's curbside pickup, delivery, etc. And then we added in a blog and video component to it to kind of promote. So the website was launched as part of COVID recovery, but it's really designed to be a long-term economic development, talent attraction, marketing piece of like, look how great these downtowns are. And it certainly performs well. We've launched a number of blogs featuring the different businesses in downtown, the different experiences. And that messaging right now is obviously tailored more towards locals, shopping local, pickup, curbside delivery, etc. We recently launched shopdurhamregion.ca or .com, and essentially this is a collected database of, I think there's 300 local small businesses that all have online stores via Shopify platform. Shopify kind of links into it the best. And there's over 1,000 products. And essentially we've created this dashboard where you can shop from multiple and have it shipped under one kind of way bill. So it kind of makes it a little bit simple to go shopping at a number of different small businesses and just put everything in one cart and not have to worry about, putting in your card 3 or 4 different times at the different stores. So it's a great way to, one, promote the different products that are available in the region, and gives a bit of a marked advantage for some of our small businesses that are already online and in a digital space. At the early onset, we had some small businesses that were in this kind of creative market space that, saw us as a competitor. And we were like, no, we're just applying government funding that you can link your shop and the sales go direct to you. There's no commission. It's free to join. There's a media company. I think if you sign up, we will send a photographer out to, take a picture of like 5 to 10 products or 5 to 10 photos that can upload to your profile. And then you can add as many products as you want. So, and then we put some marketing dollars behind it to really push this out around our shop local messaging. So those are a few of the programs that we're finding that are just really performing well. And it's giving us a great opportunity to interact and engage. And it's so hard right now. Like, we're a government organization, but we have to respond to COVID regulation changes when our premier or our elected government officials decide whatever we're doing. So we're in a response state. So we're sympathetic to the challenges that local businesses have. So those are some really great funding investments that we've made that are having tremendous growth and return. So Brandon from Durham Tourism, that kind of concludes my thought there. Thanks.
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, it's really interesting. I love this idea that we're not just talking about putting cash in hand, but we're actually talking about guidance and helping build structures. Because I think what can happen is, and this has been my experience working with small business communities, is certainly it's easy enough to dole out cash to a business owner, but it doesn't necessarily. There's that old phrase, teaching them how to fish as opposed to giving them the fish. It's a band-aid solution, right? It certainly can help them pay their bills in the moment. But what I love about what many of you are saying here is you're talking about how are we not only injecting this funding to the business owner, but having them actively making it work for them. It's akin to more active investing as opposed to passive investing, I think. Angelique, great to see you here. Join us on stage. Did you want to contribute to the conversation?
Hey everybody, I'm just gonna listen for a bit, but I appreciate you bringing me up, and I'll
Of,
chime in. I'll definitely chime in.
of course. That's awesome. I'm glad to have you here. Okay. With that, I think, I sort of want to touch on another question that I think gets raised when we talk about small business capital and economic development is sort of this idea of, how do you, because in Canada, I know that, we have limitations in how we inject funding. But my curiosity is more about do you consider private and public partnerships sort of an opportunity as well? So right now, I think a lot of us are focused on the federal and provincial offers that we're getting, but maybe I throw this one out to Dan is, are there opportunities for public-private partnerships where maybe there's some private funding or capital or opportunities come well, or is that sort of a boundary that's difficult to cross?
Thanks, Bob. And I think there's probably a lot of different examples. I'll share one that I'm somewhat familiar with, and then we can take it from there. We started an accelerator about a year ago, and so while directly there's no cash involved, we bring qualified companies in, and then we provide them guidance. So that guidance point you were talking about through Ryerson DMZ, so some really heavy hitting business advice. The other component, though, or components rather, is we are aligned with angel investors, so private capital. I believe it will be coming back on board. There's something called OCE, which is an Ontario Innovation Fund. So one of the programs that we were looking at is matching. So first of all, the coaching and the guidance and the acceleration expertise to help companies get super focused and grow, aligning them with angel capital, leveraging that angel capital against an Ontario Innovation Fund, and having that matched with private friends and family and or their own money, if you will. So stacking it that way, all with the intent of growing that business to a point where it can get ready for venture capital and seed funding. So other than the Ontario venture component, which is a little bit unique, I don't think that's a unique model. And I think it's one that is setting folks up for success because there's support and there's also financial and other accountability. I'm Dan, and I'm done speaking.
I want to jump in and say I totally agree with you all who really focus with small business as far as like giving them resources to scale up. Like I spend a lot of my time doing that before we ever get to talking about the money. I like to really make sure that that businesses are equipped for that next stage. And there's a lot of ground to cover with that. Some of the things that we did, like I'm supposed to help, introduce storefront owners, vacant storefront owners with business, other small businesses, for example. But what I've noticed is that they needed, some of them need actual like business courses, business classes, because they might have happened to business or inherited a business, after a parent passed away or something like that. So everybody's not really, every small business owner isn't there necessarily because they wanted to. A lot of them do, but those are the discussions that I'm having with them. And so we launched like business workshops with the partnerships, like you guys said. So we partnered with It Starts here in Milwaukee to do, just really start teaching them the Canvas model of building their business plans. For those that was, whether they were starting up or existing, a lot of people didn't have like a business plan or a business profile. So we worked with them, and then COVID came through, and then we had to go to square one. So we decided to just find local professionals to do a business assistance series just called Filler Connections, and we're just connecting them with professionals that are local that they can reach out to really help them. Um, and so yeah, we see the value in collaborating with partnerships and just really working with the small business on scaling up before we ever get to like any type of loan. So I definitely see capital in the eyes of actual resources.
That's a really great point as well, Angelique. The idea that capital can be a resource for sure. Lara, I noticed that you also had your mic open. Did you want to add to the?
Yeah, so I come at this a little bit differently. And yes, I've absolutely have provided the technical assistance. And I agree with both Dan and Angelique that, partnering to do that is really important. But, in Salt Lake City, I had two different funding tools that I could use to support our businesses. The first was the Economic Development Loan Fund. It was a loan fund capitalized at about $6 million that we could provide loans into businesses, both startup as well as existing. Standard lending criteria would apply. Now, not as stringent as a bank, but we would definitely look for the loan to be collateralized. We made sure that they had a somewhat solid credit before providing that loan, because it is still taxpayer dollars. And those funds were used for a variety of business, either startup or to help them expand. The other tool that I had, which I think is really interesting, is how we utilized our tax increment dollars. So the city has been doing tax increment for many years, 50 years. They started the redevelopment agency of Salt Lake City 50 years ago, and during that time, they did some really smart things, primarily building and owning parking structures. Those parking structures then produce revenue that is not tied to a specific jurisdiction like the tax increment dollars would be, but it allows them to be able to deploy that capital citywide. And so we had the ability to loan funds into projects specifically through those dollars. That's not to say we didn't use tax increment dollars to also do that. And what's really unique in Utah is the redevelopment law requires 10% of all new tax increment to be set aside for affordable housing. So when I arrived in Salt Lake in 2016, we reallocated $21 million of redevelopment funds and then put those into projects. So ultimately, over the course of 2 years, we deployed $44 million into affordable housing, resulting in about 3,500 new units. So a number of different ways to provide small business capital to get projects built.
Thank you, Laura. Those are some great thoughts as well, for sure. Did any one of our speakers want to contribute to the question as well?
I had a question to Lara because
Yeah.
we do a lot of similar. We give tips as well, and create TIDs here in Milwaukee for development projects. But I was wondering, I guess I was a little confused on how you're doing it for small businesses. Are you talking about mixed use developments where well maybe would have housing and then have commercial space at the bottom for small businesses? I was just trying to figure out that part.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a great question. And yes, the housing developments that we were involved in, we did try to ensure that there would be first floor activity of those housing developments. The first one would be a project we did in it's one of the commercial corridors. Nobody would know it if I said it. But that project, we did daycare on the first floor. Another project, we put an art gallery and an experiential art program on the first floor. And another project, we were working with a very large nonprofit in the community that supports the film industry to look at, could they be a portion of the project as well? So we didn't just look at small business, the traditional restaurants and stores, but we also tried to look at cultural amenities as part of that first floor for the housing developments we did.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, we're definitely doing those mixed use developments. It's kind of seem like that's the way that our particular city is going with the housing, um, and the commercial together. If you come to Milwaukee, you'll see a lot of that.
And it's important as you're negotiating development agreements to look at how you can create small business space. While it's not capital per se, it is capital because you're reducing the rental rates to a small business owner, which actually is providing them some, it's not capital direct, but it's definitely a way to help fund their business.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. That was a great clarification there. I know we've had some new folks join us on stage with Asif, Eli, and Nathan. Nathan, I wondered if you wanted to contribute to the conversation as well. And before I'm just giving you a heads up, Nathan, because I just wanted to really quick reset the room for those that have just joined us as well. So if you're just joining us, welcome to the ECDev Network. My co-hosts here are Dan Taylor, Lara Fritz, and myself, Bob Minhas. So great to have you here. Just starting with a little reset to let you know the room is being recorded. We do reuse the content in a podcast format. The theme today that we're talking about is small business capital and what are some best practices from an economic development perspective to support your small business community with that. Now, if you find this topic super interesting, we'd really love if you want to ping your friends into the room by using the plus sign on the bottom of the app if you have some colleagues or friends that can contribute or just want to learn from the conversation as well. On the stage, you'll see some amazing speakers, so be sure to check out their bios and to follow them because the speakers you see on stage are amazing at what they do, and they're probably in other Clubhouse rooms sharing some really great information there as well, so be sure to follow that. Now, if you do have a question, on the bottom of the app, you'll see a hand icon with a notepad. If you press that, that's raising your hand. That'll allow myself, Lara, or Dan to bring you on stage to be able to add to the conversation or ask a question. Just keep in mind when you do that, your mic does go live. So as soon as you jump on stage, you want to make sure that you hit mute right away. Now, also, if you're on stage and you're contributing to the conversation, at the end, if it helps, try and remember to say, "I'm done speaking" with your name. And that allows sort of the next person who wants to join in a clear runway to jump into the conversation as well. And if you hear something you really love as a speaker on stage, when you press and open and close the mic button really quick, that represents clapping here on Clubhouse. So that's it I have for the reset. And so again, I want to go back to Nathan. Nathan, I wondered if you wanted to contribute to this conversation around small business capital.
Yeah, and sorry, I had to step away from my phone, so I don't know if you've called on me earlier or not.
No.
But yeah, the access to capital is the number one problem we have with all of our small businesses and entrepreneurs down here in Brownsville. We recently started a seed fund program for them and kind of made it a little bit more of a competition to sort of spur or kind of create more of an ecosystem or an environment of entrepreneurship down here. A lot of our best and brightest will leave to Austin or Houston, which is all well and fine. But if we're able to provide them with the resources they need here, they can stay and grow their brand and business and provide more opportunities for our community. So aside from the seed fund program, we're also in the midst of creating our own accelerator program, like I know many of you have already done as well. Following within those footsteps, it's worked out well. It is an interesting environment to be in at the moment because we're in this sort of rush of development over in Boca Chica Beach with SpaceX and the rocket launches. So we're trying to capitalize on both that activity that's going on, but also trying to do it in a way that's equitable and inclusive for everyone within our community.
Thank you, Nathan. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. Can I throw it out there to Eli? So Eli, I know with your research, the work that you do, you're looking at different ecosystems and different communities, and I wondered if small business capital was a part of what startups or what other people are looking for when they pick a community.
Hello everyone, yeah, I'm a little bit outside, sorry for the background noise, but yeah, it's definitely a topic of interest for us. Usually what we see is that in the most developed economies and startup ecosystems you have almost virtually no support for very good reasons, because supporting and giving grants to businesses, not grants, but you would definitely want, going back to Dan's point, that the private sector is going to do the investment. Because there is a business logic and there is skin in the game. It's very hard to invest money when you're the government and it doesn't go out from your pocket, but when an investor makes a decision like that, it's a much more sharp investment, sharp decision, because it's your own money, and that's the best investment there are. The skin in the game is probably the best thing existing in the investment sphere. But yeah, sometimes there are, we have to jumpstart an ecosystem, and there are not enough private investors to do that. So the government can very, very carefully make some moves. I'm not a big fan of those moves, to be honest. I've seen a lot of, the minute you start giving people money that is not connected to their business logic, then in many cases you create some kind of entitlement, or why did you support me before and now you don't help me scale, and so on. So it can get a little bit addictive when you get free money in a way that is not really connected to your business. It's necessary sometimes. At Startup Link we believe a lot more in investment in infrastructure. Just like Lara said, subsidize co-working spaces, even give them for free, do accelerators just like the one Nathan mentioned, and so on. Improve the branding and the promotion of your city. But this fear of picking winners and giving them public money for criteria that is not always justified, we usually feel like it's a little bit destructive at some point. In the beginning it's necessary, but when you do it, do know that you're intervening with business in a not so natural way. So I'm just saying we have to be, let's say, careful with it, because it can get a little bit tricky. As for startups, I'll just say that you want them to be invested by the private sector. Loans for startups are very, very difficult to pay back, because startups by definition fail in 90%. So knowing that 90% you're going to give back or pay back a loan with your collateral can be devastating. And one of the things that we recommend is absolutely never give loans to startups. Either give them money or not, but don't expect them to pay back, because they have 90% chance of failure. So there are many topics here. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting subject. Thank you.
Eli, really, really interesting point. So I just wanted to add, and then Asif, I wanted to include you in this conversation. I wanted to add one thing is that I think there's sometimes a distinction in a small business community. And perhaps this is my own sort of distinction, this idea between the small business owner, which typically to me represents the storefront, the home base. They're usually focused local. And then, of course, the startup, which could be more sort of tech based, they're more national, maybe even global. And I think when you talk about funding methodologies, that's super interesting because I think from a startup perspective, you're right. There's much more high risk in that typically you've got an MVP and you're trying to prove sort of a concept and really get buy-in. Whereas as a small business owner, you're really, really heavily placed locally and you're really creating local jobs. So, I wanted to throw this over to Asif. And when we talk about small business capital, Asif, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic, perhaps from a startup perspective or just from your own perspective.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, I will speak from a startup perspective. So I run a 2-year-old tech startup here in the Toronto area, and I think a couple of things. I'll sort of agree with what Eli just said in terms of it's difficult. There's always a high chance of failure, and it's risky. But I think two things that I've learned along the way, and we've seen with our startup here at Ground Level, is I think you can mitigate some of the risk, by through experience, right? And so even if you're a first time entrepreneur or startup, bringing in maturity and expertise in the form of advisors or people who've been there and done it before can help lessen some of that risk, for those third parties that might be looking at you. And I think two is one thing that we found very helpful here in the local ecosystem is finding what I'll call an alternative to sort of traditional capital, which is we've teamed up with a number of different university programs where we're able to leverage student teams, both undergrad and grad programs, to develop or be involved in our R&D or discrete project development or things like that, where essentially we're not footing the bill for that. It's government funded through these university programs, and students are getting a chance to work on cool innovation type projects that we're making available to them. We're getting essentially free labor, and not having to pay for that. So it's a different way to access capital. And ultimately, we own IP, and advances our technology forward. So we've been doing a lot of that lately, with, like I said, a number of different programs, and even accessing a lot of interns on the business side of things through various U.S. schools. We're also involved in a number of different incubator and accelerators as well that have helped sort of open some of those doors. But I think I guess what I'm trying to say is it doesn't always have to be a check, coming in from an investor. You can, sort of find other ways to, access that capital or leverage funding, through, work effort and things like that as well. I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you, Asif. So again, an interesting thought around, we've talked about small business capital injection in terms of resources, and you're talking also about, it seems to me, about innovation. How are we really cultivating and procuring information here in Canada locally? And that certainly is another great aspect for small business capital for sure. So really great point. Dan, did you want to add to the conversation?
I just wanted to chime in. I've enjoyed all the conversations, in particular Eli and Asif, and in general, I absolutely agree with Eli. I'm a big proponent of the private sector playing a primary role, although I have learned that on occasion, governments should play a role and can play a role. I do think governments need to be cautious. I love the creativity and the innovation that Asif was talking about. It brings me back to Tony Robbins. And one of the quote, I might bungle the quote a little bit, but basically what Tony Robbins says is, it's not the resources that you have, it's how resourceful you are. So Well, capital is absolutely necessary. I think as entrepreneurs, we and folks need to be super resourceful. And I love how maybe Asif wasn't, and maybe he has, but in this example, hasn't been directly accessing government capital, but he's been leveraging government programs that give him human capital at no cost, which I think is it's brilliant and fantastic. And glad to hear. I'm Dan, and I'm done speaking.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, really, really great insights as well. And I think we're at 12:45, so I want to move on to the next question, or pretty much the last question for the day. And it really feeds around this idea of we've talked about the role of government and the role of private, but I think what I'd really love to hear from those here on the stage, or even those who want to join us from the audience, is, what are how do we look at succession in terms of small business capital? And let me just clarify that question, which is such that, are we looking at injecting small business capital to help existing businesses stay? Or is there sort of an idea of investing capital into how are we creating new businesses? So, to Asif's point about innovation, how are we doing that with local businesses, ensuring that there are no empty storefronts, or that what our residents need are stores available? So just sort of throwing that question out there. And Laura, do you mind if Brandon, did you want to jump into this conversation?
Yeah, I'd absolutely love to jump in on this one. I think succession planning is such an interesting topic right now, especially when we're looking at the baby boomer generation, upcoming retirement, and kind of the next generation. There's a number of small family-owned independent businesses where maybe the children are involved in the business or they're not, or maybe the children are involved in the business but they're not ready to level up and take it on. So I think there's a huge opportunity here, to your point of how do we support this in economic development. And I think it starts with outreach. I know a number of small business owners in Ontario locally that have had to reach out to various ECDEV organizations or Board of Trades, BIAs, trying to find advice. I think there's an opportunity for people to connect individuals to industry, especially if you might not have expertise in, let's call it, glass fabrication, but if you've got business expertise, you can certainly apply business knowledge and practice to a new business. So how do we keep those jobs locally, where the head or the family or the individual or individuals who are running it are now looking to advance into retirement or slowing it down? So I think that's it's a very interesting piece of this whole succession planning, to keep the businesses that you have in your community that rely on supports to kind of deliver that. So I'll add that thought from my end, not necessarily related to Durham tourism work, but certainly of interest in the ECDEV space. Thanks.
Thank you, Brandon, for contributing that as well. That's a great point. Laura, can I throw it to you? I'd be curious to, we've kind of gone back and forth around succession, but is there something around, are we investing capital in helping succession as a part of a recovery strategy, excuse me?
That's such a great question. And, it's, I think, something economic development professionals have struggled with for a long time. Family-run businesses, how do you, as an economic development professional, step into that family and say, we're concerned that this institution in our community may go away? In many times, the patriarch of the family may not be ready to have that conversation, or the matriarch may not be ready to have that conversation. And so it's always very delicate, as the government, in quotes, coming in and having those conversations. But, one way that we have addressed it is by having seminars about succession planning, to just remind people that it's an important part of the conversation. And, again, talking, as Angelique had mentioned, engaging a partner to put that program on, so it doesn't look like it's coming from the government, but it's coming from, a partner organization, helping our businesses understand how to put their succession plans together, and then reminding them that, we do have, for example, an economic development loan fund, or we can connect you to funding resources to help you continue to grow and make sure your business becomes your legacy. And I'm Laura Fritz, and I'm done speaking.
That's a really great point around family and legacy, Laura. Thank you for sure. Can I throw it out to the floor to perhaps Nathan or Asif from your point of view as well when we talk about investing capital in succession? If you have any thoughts on that or questions.
That I had never really thought of that, and I'm immediately thinking to there's a business here in Brownsville. They're they have a grandfathered permit to cook barbacoa in vaso, so essentially they can cook their meat in the ground, which is like a traditional, authentic way to do it in northern Mexico. The only place in the 48 states that can actually do that, but none of his children want to take that business on from him. And so kind of talking to him about a secession is something that I never thought of us partaking in, but definitely something we'd look into now with cases like that.
Really great share. Thank you, Nathan. Dan,
Yeah, this is a really important topic. I mean, when you get into smaller communities where the critical mass is somewhat limited in terms of the number of businesses, and there are successful businesses, or maybe even what Nathan's talking about is not only unique but cultural and irreplaceable. Once you lose that license, right, you never get to cook food buried in the ground again. I'm sure there are many other examples. So I mean, there is a whole, I don't know that it's new, but there's a whole new industry cropping up about people buying existing businesses, about private sector consultations on succession planning, etc. And I suspect that it's a huge industry that maybe as economic developers we may not be paying as much attention to. It's probably could be a big part of business retention and expansion. It might even be the most obvious one staring us in the face that we're not seeing yet. So first of all, I know we had a succession plan theme in mind. That was for the profession. I think maybe we need two talks. And I think we should make this a deep dive theme and figure out how to bring some folks in. But I think it's very important. Think about it, right? There's a business that's maybe been going on for years or generation. It's part of the community. It's successful. There's employment, and there's nobody to take over the reins. They literally, every day, these businesses wither away, and they just cease to exist, which is an economic tragedy, really, for the community. I'm Dan, and I'm done speaking.
that's a really great thought as well, Dan, around the culture of that business or how that business adds to the fabric of that smaller community. For sure, that's important as well. Can I throw this out to you, perhaps, Jimmy, as well? Did you have any thoughts around the idea of investing capital?
Well, I hadn't thought of investing capital into that particularly, but like Dan said, that is a big topic, and we could spend a lot of time talking about it. We've done some training around it. We have the extension service here in Texas, and they have a whole program where they'll come and talk about it. But we've targeted it more kind of at farmers, because that's what we see in our areas is our farmers are aging out and the kids don't want to take over. So we have to find other people to step in and possibly buy those businesses, because so much of our economy is tied to agriculture. So that's where we've seen a big hit, and we're still, we don't have a perfect plan by any means, but we've used our extension service just to educate the public. But I would love to talk more about this, because in small communities, this is huge, really. It's really a huge topic. So I'm done talking.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you as well. Just wanted to throw out to the floor if anyone else wanted to contribute to the discussion. I know that, as Dan said, we'll have a deeper discussion in the future, or perhaps someone in our audience that wanted to add to the chat. Okay, that's cool. we could totally move on a little bit early to final thoughts. And I think the final thought here that I'd love to go around the stage and ask everyone is, when you think of small business capital, when you think about injecting into your small business community, what do you think is the one barrier, the one potential barrier that you could see already? So, for example, if we're talking about small business capital from a municipal perspective, how are we getting council on board and, ensuring that their perspective is aligned with what we're thinking as well. So I'd love to throw it to the floor, and maybe Lara, if you don't mind, I could start with you because I know you've worked with private and public economic development corporations.
Ooh, that is such a great question. Can you just repeat it back to me so I make sure I can capture the whole essence of it? Bob?
Sorry, I was cute. Sorry. I'm so
It's okay. Can you just repeat the question for me?
Yes. But, again, the idea is when we think about small business, I'm totally blanking all of a sudden because that.
I had the same moment. I was like, he just asked me a great question and now it just went out my head.
This is humiliating. Okay, I'm so glad to record this. So I think the idea was around if we're looking at small business capital or small business investment in our community, what's a potential barrier that we worry about? Like, what's a potential barrier to overcome that you can see happening? So my example, previous community, I know we sometimes had struggle with council, being able to get council on board with the same vision. Obviously they have a fiduciary responsibility for the municipality as well. So what are those barriers, and are there ways you've overcome them?
Yeah, I think there's three barriers. One is with the local lending institutions thinking that the city is competing against them. So it's important to make sure that they're knowledgeable about the tool and what the tool that you're creating is going to do to support their work. Because really, we're the lender of last resort as a locality or a municipality. And so we really want that business to succeed, so we'll make the loan that the bank won't, but hopefully we're getting them to a place where they're credit worthy enough to go to that local bank and receive the bigger loan. So, one, getting them comfortable with it. The second is the public. Residents don't necessarily understand why we're lending into businesses. And many times the funds that we're lending are not coming directly from general fund or quote unquote taxpayer dollars. So it's important that the local residents understand that. And then Bob, as you mentioned, it's always important that city councils or advisory boards understand the role of economic development as a lender. Making sure that they're comfortable, because you're right, they do have that fiduciary responsibility. And so, I think there's three different levels: public sector, residents, and the public, leadership that all need to be on board in order for a program to be successful. I'm Laura Fritz, and I'm done speaking.
Thank you, Laura. Some really, really great thoughts there as well in terms of potential barriers. Brandon, can I throw Dan, can I throw this to you about
Sure.
final?
So Bob, I have a dream.
Do it.
And my dream is that the collective we, I'm not sure who the collective we is yet, but let's call it economic developers, rally the community to create a community development fund that is really private sector and citizen based versus institutional based. So imagine you are a resident with some means, and there's let's call it a volunteer grassroots community organization that says, you know what, we want to invest in our community. So it might operate very similar to these other institutions we've talked about, but it's all private capital, and people believe in their community and they invest in their community, and they structure it with risk management, they structure it with accountability. Maybe some things are forgivable, or maybe it's low interest, or maybe the group gets some skin in the game, 5%, 15%, I don't know what the number is. So it's kind of riffing a little bit off of what Eli was saying, that there's a vested interest. Maybe the vested interest is not 100% return on investment financially, but maybe it is that people have a vision of their community and they want to build their community up. So, and maybe this model exists already, I don't know, but I think that would be fantastic if that was part of a new dynamic. And maybe COVID is just a thing. What I'm hearing is that people haven't been going out, and those with means are sitting on a pile of cash and liquidity. Maybe this might be a way to kickstart our local economies. I'm Dan, and I'm done speaking.
And Bob, I'm going to just riff off of Dan a little bit. He said something really exciting to me, which is this whole idea of crowdsourcing. And I put an article up on our LinkedIn page. And for those of you who are not familiar, we do have a LinkedIn page now, which is called the Dev Network. And I put an article up there. One of my friends, Lanier Richardson, just crowdsourced, I want to say, don't quote me on this, but I think it was like $13 million to purchase an underperforming shopping center in Baltimore, and used crowdsource funding to do this, and is working with the community to revitalize the shopping center. It's fascinating. I love what he's doing. So if you get a chance, go read the article. It's great. And just another way that we can provide small business capital is through crowdsourcing.
Really great thought there as well, Laura. Thank you. Wonderful. Can I throw it out to Angelique? Did you want to add a final thought around what we've been talking about?
Yes, thank you. So I would say the biggest hurdle or bump in the road for what I see is equity, regardless if it's from practices of lenders or equitable distribution of resources. It is an issue right now. It's not uh, equal. There's other neighborhoods and areas where small businesses are that suffer the burden of our funds being sent towards other neighborhoods, more affluent neighborhoods. So that, to me, single-handedly is something that I see play a role in almost every facet of economic development. And my name is Angelique, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Angelique. Brandon, did you have any final thoughts to contribute?
No, I think this is a really interesting topic. I know the subject's always limited by character count, but the word investment really makes sense from everything that everyone's been talking about. So the next time is kind of like small business capital investment. I think there's so many communities that are investing in different programs that are having just such tremendous success. So I always love being a sponge and a fly on the wall in this conversation and hearing what's happening in Milwaukee and kind of in other markets. It's inspiring to know, we're doing some cool things as well, and hopefully that inspires. Not every program is fit for every community, but research and development or rob and duplicate practices are very much a real thing. So I think I'll close with that. Just want to thank everyone for the conversation today. Brandon from Durham Tourism. Thank you.
That's a great thought as well, Brandon. Thank you. And then Nathan, before we end the room, did you want to add any final thoughts to the conversation?
No, I've just, if anything, it's spurred more thoughts of things I need to look into for our community. But I'm glad to have been able to participate. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. And I believe, Laura, we have a room on Friday, do we not?
We do. I'm so excited. On Friday, May 7th at 3 p.m., we'll be back here on Clubhouse talking about women and BIPOC businesses and how, as economic developers, we can be supporting them. I'm so excited to have my friend Michelle Daly joining us. He is a long-standing entrepreneur in the DC metro area and is going to talk specifically about what economic developers can do to help BIPOC businesses. So I am thrilled to be leading that conversation, and hopefully everyone here will be able to join us on Friday at 3.
Thank you, Laura. 3 p.m. Eastern. And as Laura mentioned earlier, if you head to our LinkedIn page, the ECDev Network, you can grab details, the link, but you can find us here on Clubhouse as well. And with that, we are at 1:04. We are on time. I want to thank everybody for making the time to join us today, but more importantly, jumping on stage and adding your thoughts. Of course, I want to thank Laura and Dan here as well for co-hosting this room. And we look forward to seeing you guys on Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern, in Clubhouse. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Share the podcast when you get it. Thanks a lot. Tell your friends
Happy
to join.
Cinco de Mayo.
Yeah, Cinco de Mayo.
Fish tacos are on my menu tonight.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.